And the other reason, and perhaps if honourable members will allow me to elucidate on this point, it may satisfy them. The other reason for ensuring that we have the election on the 12th is that we have it on a Thursday. Thursday is by convention the day on which we have such elections in this country. There doesn't seem to be a strong argument to the contrary to move it those days early, and I will give way to the honourable gentleman if he wishes to bring forward one.
I should also point out to the Minister that there is no convention to have elections every 2 years, but we seem to be content to do that. Can I just take him back to his points on the Northern Ireland budget bill? Because those are important points, and of course we all want to see people get paid. We don't want a kind of Republican-style shutdown of government in Northern Ireland. So can he answer the question I asked him? Can we not resolve this by sitting this Friday?
Well, I would say again to the honourable gentleman 3 points. First of which is Thursday is the usual date, so why change it? I have yet to hear an argument advanced to change it to that. Essentially, the honourable gentleman is making a case to change it from Thursday to Monday. Secondly, we need to have time to properly consider this bill. And thirdly, if honourable members wish to move the date to that earlier date, they need to come up with a compelling reason to do so, which I've yet to hear, other than daylight. So there are principled, I think I've dealt with this point, there are...
Order. We can't have everybody on the feet at the same time. If the Minister gives way, by all means. Minister.
I will make some progress, and then I will consider giving way to the honourable gentleman opposite. So there are principled reasons as to why we wish to have proper scrutiny of legislation for the Northern Ireland budget. It's essential for teachers and doctors and nurses in Northern Ireland to be paid. There is a convention that elections are held on Thursdays, and the party opposite, once again, is trying to move the goalposts on this. Initially, the argument was they did not want a general election on the 12th of December because they were concerned that this government would somehow seek to ram through the bill giving effect to the Prime Minister's deal. Yesterday, the Prime Minister at the dispatch box gave that assurance, and now they're seeking to contrive another reason to artificially create divisions in this House over moving the date by 3 days. I say to honourable members, we've had 3 years to consider this bill. Does 3 days really make that much difference? And I think this is in tune with a wider point. The public are getting more and more frustrated at this House endlessly coming up with reasons, procedural reasons, which prevent us getting on and doing the thing we want to do, which is set out in this bill, which is to have the general election and to allow us to resolve this issue. So we will therefore be resisting the amendment in the name of the opposition to move the date of the general election. I give way.
Well, it's just a technical question in a way, really. If the general election is on the 12th of December, when will the new Parliament sit and when will the Queen's speech be? Because when this was last done in 1923, 1924, with the general election on the 6th of December, the Queen's speech wasn't until the 15th of January, which would make it difficult to get any serious business done by the end of January.
Well, I hope I can reassure the honourable gentleman. The reason why the government wishes to have a general election is to ensure that we have a sustainable majority to pass the bill that implements the Prime Minister's withdrawal agreement, and therefore the impetus on us is to get that done as quickly as possible. So I don't think you will find delays from this side of the House. I would also briefly like to touch upon the amendment which stands in my name. Now, the Scottish National Party have raised the concern which the amendment seeks to address. Now, their concern was to ensure that the registration deadline in Scotland for the 12th of December election was the same as for the rest of the country. The government supports the intention of the SNP amendment in relation to this election to ensure that we have across UK approach to the registration deadline. This will allow a comprehensive UK-wide communication campaign by the Electoral Commission to advertise the deadline and to ensure that those who want to register are able to do so in a timely manner. The government's amendment would achieve the consistency in registration deadlines the honourable member and his party desired without any longer-term unintended consequences. Yes, I give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way. I think it's clear that the contentious area in this part of the discussion is about whether it's going to be the 9th or the 12th. And number 10 had previously suggested that they're willing to pull the bill if the amendments regarding EU nationals and 16 and 17-year-olds have been selected and passed. So my question to the Minister is this. Is the government willing to die in a ditch over whether or not this is the 9th or the 12th? What is their intention if this amendment passes?
Well, I believe I've set out two sensible and compelling reasons to have the date on the 12th, and I have yet to hear, to the contrary, an argument why we need to move it by 3 days. I really think we have dealt with this point. I know other honourable members wish to speak, so if the House will forgive me, I will just conclude my points on the amendment that stands in my name. So the government's amendment removes St Andrew's Day 2019 only from the operation of Regulation 29.4 and 8.3 of the Scottish regulations. This both restricts the change to this election only and leaves the subsequent register intact. The effect of the amendment is to remove a bank holiday from the calculation of time for the registering for the voter deadline. It would instead be classed as a normal working day, but for this election only. We feel that the amendment, as we have drafted it, will, I hope, address SNB concerns, but will limit any unintended consequences of amending the relevant provision of the Representation of People regulations. So I think, in summary, honourable members, we are trying to achieve a straightforward, simple piece of legislation which ensures that we can have a general election in short order. And I would urge all honourable members to resist the temptation to complicate and amend this to allow us to have the general election on the 12th of December so that we can get a sustainable majority, so we can deliver the Prime Minister's deal and we can finally move on.
Tommy Shepherd.
Thank you, Chair. I want to make some comments generally on the bill as a whole and then to discuss the individual amendments that have been selected. I have to start by saying that it's clearly not ideal to have an election a couple of weeks before Christmas for anyone. The nights are fair drawing in. It will be cold and it will be dark, and many of the people in this country will be prepared, quite understandably, in looking forward to Christmas and spending time with their family and relatives. So it's hardly an ideal time. But from our perspective in the SNP, we think this is a necessary requirement now, because we have reached a situation of impasse in this Parliament where it is incapable of resolving probably the biggest political issue that has divided the United Kingdom in my lifetime. There are competing views as to what the end point of the Brexit process should be. And parliamentary democracy in this country, it seems to me, has now reached a point of stasis where it is incapable of adjudicating between those outcomes. It is therefore right and proper, in my view, that we should go back to the electorate and allow them to reflect on what can happen. So this will be very much the Brexit election. And I am very pleased that we have moved the government from the position that it had a few weeks ago, where it didn't actually want a Brexit election. Yes. It didn't want a Brexit election where the people be allowed to cast their views about different outcomes. It wanted to get Brexit done and then go to the electorate afterwards. And that would have been a travesty, Mr. Hoyle, because what that would have said to people is, we're going to have a general election. Brexit will be one of the big topics of conversation, but there's really no point you expressing a view, because we're going to conclude the matter before the first ballot is cast. That would have been a ridiculous anti-democratic situation, and I'm glad that we have got the Prime Minister and the government away from that, even if it does mean he might be looking for a ditch on Thursday. Now, the reason why many people have said, lamented the fact that 3.5 years on, Parliament hasn't resolved this matter. In my view, that's simply because it is without any reasonable resolution. Because the promise of Brexit has turned out to be a lie. People were told in 2016 that they could vote to leave the European Union and they would be better off as a result. That is not true. And hardly anyone in this chamber would now argue that that was true. In fact, it is a matter of how bad the different options are in terms of Brexit going ahead. And that is why, quite understandably, now there is a large body of opinion in this country for whom the conclusion of this process should be to say, that's it, it's gone far enough, stop it now, we want to get off. And I think an election will allow that view to come to the fore and for people to do it. The election will also allow the Prime Minister to put his particular deal before the election. Because be under no illusions, what the Prime Minister has done is he has taken an extremely flawed deal that was come up by his predecessor, and he has made it immeasurably worse. This is a proposal, a series of proposals that the Prime Minister has agreed with the European Union that will impoverish people in this country, that will remove the standing of the United Kingdom very much in the eyes of the world and leave it a much worse place. I don't want that for the people of England, Wales and Northern Ireland, and I certainly don't want that outcome for the people of Scotland. And that is why it is right and proper that the Prime Minister should put his case before the electorate. And I look forward to the Prime Minister being challenged, not just by opposition parties, but by Nigel Farage as well, to see whether or not the deal that he's come up with satisfies the real hard-right Brexiteers for whom nothing will sate their appetite.
You're going to be tough.
Now, the situation in Scotland, of course, Chair, as many people have remarked, is quite different. 62% of the people of Scotland didn't vote for this mess, and that's 62%, by the way, once we exclude most teenage voters at the time and most people who were born elsewhere in the European Union. Had they been allowed to take part in that decision, the figure would have been far higher still. And if the decision were asked again today, it would be far higher still. And it is my responsibility here to represent the people who elected me. So happily take an intervention.
Thank him for giving way on the issue of votes for 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds. I believe that all men and women are born equal, and in this place everybody should be equal. And the amendment, which fortunately was not picked today, would have given 16 and 17-year-olds in Scotland and in Wales the vote, but...
Order! You're out of order. It is not debatable. Thomas Young.
Thank you, Chair. I'm confused as to why that particular intervention should be made at this point in what I was saying, but I will come on to mention that when I consider the amendments that are before us. But I want to say for now that I think it was the honourable member for Birmingham Yardley who said that, well, what could happen in the outcome of election is we get another hung parliament without a majority one way or the other. That, of course, is true. But an election will allow all of us the opportunity to refresh a mandate. Because I, for one, believe there are far too many people in this Parliament who are imprisoned by an out-of-date mandate from 2017, which is against what they would want to do now, having considered the matter. And it will give colleagues, particularly in Her Majesty's opposition, particularly in seats where a majority voted to leave the European Union, the opportunity to go there and argue, if they so wish, for a rethink and for this matter to be put back to the public before any final decision is taken. That mandate is not present at this Parliament. That mandate could be present in a new Parliament, and that is one of the reasons why I think an election would be welcome as well. I will, but I'm anxious of time.
On the question of the mandate, if we look at the 2016 referendum, it is a fact that in that referendum, electoral offences were committed by vote leave. The campaign, the Prime Minister, the Chancellor of the Duchess of Lancaster and their chief advisor were actually involved in. Isn't this general election an opportunity to highlight their role and for a new government to investigate their role properly, something which has not been done under this government?
Indeed. I mean, there would be the opportunity to do that, and I think those transgressions should be investigated, and I do think they undermine the result of the 2016 referendum. Yet another reason why I think the electorate should be allowed to look at this matter again. But on the question of mandates, I also want to be very clear, Chair, that when it comes to mandates in Scotland, we will be fighting this general election for 3 objectives. 1 will be to stop Brexit, not to rubber stamp it. 2 will be to get rid of the most right-wing Tory government in my lifetime. And 3 will be to demand that people in Scotland have got the right to choose an alternative future, an alternative path of doing things, and should not be dragged along against their will. And we will put that case to the people in Scotland, and if we win that mandate, and if we win that election, then I demand that other people in this chamber respect that decision and do not stand in the way of the people of Scotland when they next seek the opportunity to determine their own method of governance. Chair, if I could just turn in closing to the amendments. I do regret, and I won't discuss them because I know they haven't been selected, but I'd simply to say I think it's a matter of regret that we are not able, at this time of political crisis where we are discussing how to get out of it, we're not able to seize the opportunity to extend our franchise and allow 2 very important groups of people in our community who have a vested interest more than we do in the outcome of this decision, allow them the opportunity to participate. So I regret very... Okay.
On the point of voting age, I just wonder if the honourable member appreciates, I'm sure he does, that of the 16, 17-year-olds who were 16 or who were 17-year-old in 2016 were 18-year-old and of voting age in 2017, when 56% of voters in Scotland voted for either the Conservative Party or Labour, who at the time, at least in the case of Labour, were committed to delivering on Brexit.
I'm unclear that that's an argument against 16 to 17-year-olds being able to vote in this election or indeed on any subsequent election.
As a principle,
happily give way with
called clutching at straws.
Well, gentleman, for giving way, and just to say I entirely concur with his points, and indeed this is the point I made more widely in the second reading debate. I do think it's a shame. Obviously, we're not able to discuss amendments that haven't been selected, but I do concur entirely with the point he's making.
Thank you very much. I think there is a broad level of agreement actually across the House, including the odd one over on that side of the chamber as well, who would agree that the time has surely come to extend the franchise. And I would hope that we don't end up in a situation where we have a general election in December and it lasts for another 5 years before we can even consider this possible enfranchisement. So it would have been a timely opportunity to seize, but we've chosen not to do so. Chair, the amendments that have been selected, let me just say that we are very much in favour of the amendment which suggests the date should move to the 9th of December, and we shall be voting for that tonight. I don't understand. The government said it wanted an election as soon as possible, so why would it not wish to have it 3 days earlier than the date? I think I've taken enough in fairness. I need to conclude. No, thank you. No, thank you. No, thank you. Which part of no don't you understand?
Sit down.
It does bring a number of benefits in terms of the ability of many of the electorate to be able to participate in the election. It does put an extra little bit of distance between the election and Christmas, and it does not inconvenience our ability to conclude our business in this Parliament in any way. It could be done. We could get our business finished on prorogue at the end of this week. So it's entirely doable, and I do not understand why the government, who have been so determined that there must be an election as soon as possible, would be so resistant to doing that for 3 days earlier. I say let's do it as soon as possible in order to get this lot out as soon as possible. And finally, Chair, just on the amendment in the name of the Minister, just to thank the government, uncharacteristically, for introducing this technical amendment, which I hope the House will support, which simply eradicates a current disadvantage there would be in the electoral registration process in Scotland, occasioned by the fact that we have a bank holiday on St Andrew's Day, the 30th of November. I hope the House will pass that and put us all on a level playing field. And with that, I shall conclude my remarks and look forward to the general election to come.
So you go, sir.
Excellency, I'm very much on the last point on the 30th of November should declare an interest. It being St Andrew's Day, it's also the day of my 60th birthday. By the 30th of November, I shall no longer be a Member of Parliament because I am not standing at the forthcoming election. And I will have been here since 2001, and I have to say the last few years in this Parliament, I don't think been Parliament at its best. In fact, it would be difficult to find a rare statement made by any one of us over the past 2 years. It's been like Groundhog Day every day. And I think the public are getting extremely fed up with our behaviour. In fact, I've never known such a disconnect between the body politic and the public. And I really do believe that any device or attempt to frustrate the public in having a general election now will be viewed extremely badly by the public, who are, as I say, extremely fed up with our behaviour. And I would just say, I understand, we all understand, why the Scottish Nationalist Party want to have, the SNP want to have an election, because they know, as we all do, in January, there is a court case about to start, which will lay bare the divisions between those who support Alex Salmond and those who support Nicola Sturgeon. And they know that if the election is delayed until next year, they will suffer at the polls. But I really do think it's strange for a party which prides itself on looking after one of the devolved parts of the United Kingdom to play party politics with Northern Ireland. And all I would say, the Honourable Lady laughs in rather a tinny way. Exactly. But no, I won't give way. No, I won't give way. But as a former Minister of State, I don't believe the Honourable Gentleman was a former Minister. As a former Minister of State in Northern Ireland, I care passionately about Northern Ireland. And I am concerned, I would say, about some aspects of the proposed legislation and how it affects Northern Ireland. But that having been said, it is my understanding that if the date of the election is brought forward, that will prevent much of the legislation we need in terms of empowering the civil service in Northern Ireland to do their job. So I would just say to the Scottish Nats, why is it that you are prepared to play politics? To what end? With the people of Northern Ireland. If you care about Northern Ireland, or perhaps you wish to cast them to one side. I think it's very clear in the legislation. I'm extremely glad and pleased and relieved that some of the amendments proposed, some of the wrecking amendments proposed today, such as giving Europeans the right, EU nationals the right to vote in British elections. I would ask again, where can British citizens vote in the EU in national elections? The answer is nowhere. And this sudden discovery that votes should be given to 16-year-olds as a matter of course. Of course everybody realises that cannot be done with the timetable available. It's another wrecking moment.
Where you should be speaking. Have you finished? So you go. I've got others waiting.
I would just say, the British people are watching our deliberations this evening. They want an election. They understand the date for the election is partially informed by the desire to have good governance and good government towards the people of Northern Ireland, and it's worth remembering that the institutions are not up and running there. It would be foolhardy to bring the election forward by a matter of days in order to frustrate that, and therefore I think that amendment should be resisted.
That's it.
My intervention was somewhat long. I thought I would make a speech in this debate and just make a small contribution. And I want to start by saying I absolutely welcome the fact we're going to have a general election. It is a sadness in a way that this Parliament hasn't been able to run its full term, particularly given the last one only ran for 2 years as well. And the reason that this Parliament hasn't been able to run its full term is because of the fact that people in this place did not do what they said they were going to do, very sadly, in the 2017 election, and that is to honour the referendum result. And we heard some of that this afternoon by some of the contributions already in this debate. What has gone on since that election in 2017? Upon which the overwhelming majority of us were re-elected to deliver Brexit. And I accept the SNP had a different position on that, and they have consistently followed the line that they took in the general election. But that's not the case for most of the rest of us. And what has happened is we have seen this belittling and talking down of the referendum result and people who dared to vote to leave the European Union. And we heard some of that again today. And indeed, the contribution of the SNP spokesman, I think, on this matter, certainly the member for Edinburgh East, was to do the same, which was to imply that Brexiteers and people who voted for leave didn't really know what they were voting for. Now, I'm in the middle of just 1 second, let me finish my point, and I will give it to the gentleman. And actually, we've seen this consistently throughout, where people who didn't vote for Brexit, who were on the other side of the debate, consistently tell Brexit voters what it is that we voted for, and they think they have the right to interpret what...
Order. No. It's not a debate about Brexit. It's about the clause. And what you're trying to do is, unfortunately, is widen the debate from where we are. We are on the clause. Have you now finished, Andrew Percy? Well, right, let's stick to where we were.
Responding to a speech that was made in the chamber, directly to a point that was made, Mr Deputy Speaker. I will give way to Honourable Gentleman. I'll give way to him.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving way, because I want to just clarify this on the record. At no time have any of us ever said people did not know what they were voting for in 2016 in the Brexit referendum. What we do say is that they were willfully lied to in that campaign.
Exactly the point, Mr Deputy Speaker, is that it is that people who went and voted Remain, they knew full well what they were doing. No, I'm not giving way to the Honourable Lady. But of course, Brexit voters were misled, they were a bit daft, they were lied to, and uniquely they couldn't see through it. And we saw it, and if anybody wants to talk about promises, I will do in a moment. If anybody wants to talk about promises in a referendum campaign, about whether people will be poorer or richer after a referendum, then I'm afraid we'll take no lectures from the SNP on this matter. I will give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Thank my refrain for giving way. We hear what we believe to be the voice of Scotland. They're the voice of some of Scotland. Yes. And the fact that they don't often say is that in 2016, in 2016, there was more people voted in Scotland to leave the European Union than voted for the SNP at the general election in 2017. And that's a fact. There's a lot of people voted to leave the European Union from Scotland.
Indeed, I mean, that's absolutely true. But as I said, Mr Deputy Speaker, at least in fairness to the SNP, their position on wanting to cancel Brexit is a consistent one that they stood on in the 2017 general election. But we heard it also from the contribution of the Honourable Gentleman for Wrexham when he intervened, which was, again, to suggest that there was some sort of fiddling in favour of leave. And this is why this Parliament is so broken. This is why this Parliament... No, I'm not giving away, because I haven't finished my point. And again, all I would say to the Honourable Gentleman, after the 2015 election, his party was fined for election expense failings. I think over the Edstone, as it was called. Momentum received the biggest fine any political group has received in the UK. I don't question the Honourable Gentleman's mandate from either the 2015 election or from 2017, because his party was responsible in one election for technical breaches when it came to expense law, or in the case of the 2017 election, because one of the groups within his party were... I will give way to him, yes.
Thank you. These were not technical breaches. This was collusion between to break electoral spending limits, and collusion in which the Prime Minister, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, and Dominic Cummings were involved. Now, that is important. I voted for Article 50, and I was misled by a campaign that I found out about after I voted for Article 50. I take it seriously. Clearly he doesn't. I believe in keeping the law.
OK, well, I mean, I'm sorry, but the Honourable Gentleman has done nothing to deliver on his 2017 election since that vote, which was to deliver Brexit. And that's a prime example of why this Parliament is so broken, because it is, never mind the £1 million that was funneled to different Remain groups in the run-up to the end of that referendum. Never mind the taxpayers' money, millions of pounds of taxpayers' money, not yet, millions of pounds of taxpayers' money used to campaign for Remain. Never mind all of the institutions of the state that were used to try to...
Thank you, Dave. I'm just going to deal with the point myself first, and I'll come to it. We are not broadening this debate. I have asked you, there are others wishing to speak. We're getting bogged down on something that's not relevant to the clause. You have answered the question at least 5 times already. My view is I would love to hear Mr Tomlinson, who's next to you. He's desperate to get in. Andrew Percy.
Mr. Deputy, we've got 2 hours for this debate, so I hope we will get to hear other members as well.
You're a former member of the Speaker's panel. You know exactly what I'm relating this to, is to the clause. We've allowed a little movement away from that. Now, I want you to speak to the clause. If not, there are other members. Mr Andrew Percy.
Well, Mr Deputy, I'm responding to points that were made in other speeches and interventions in this debate. But I will, of course, because the front bench opposite need to calm themselves a little bit. I know they're not looking forward to an election because they broke their promises from the 2017 election, but they do need to calm themselves. I will, of course, Mr Deputy Speaker, follow your ruling, because you did do me the honour of putting me on the Speaker's panel after all. But the reason this Parliament is entirely broken is precisely because of that very reason, in that the votes of the majority of this country, 17.4 million people in 2016, have not been respected, and that is why we have to get to this election. I'll give way to my gentleman.
Grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. He says Parliament is broken. It's not just broken. This Parliament is dead as a dodo. This Parliament cannot do anything. It's constant dither and delay. The public want us to get on and deliver. And a general election, this clause allows us to do that.
My honourable friend is entirely right. That's why we have to absolutely bring this Parliament to a close. And in terms of the amendment as to whether it's the 9th or the 12th, well, I'm not particularly bothered. I just want my constituents and the people in the constituencies around me who have been let down, I'm afraid to say, by their members of Parliament who haven't kept their promises from the 2017 election, where all of the constituencies around me voted by a huge margin to leave the European Union. I want them to have that say for exactly the reason that the honourable gentleman has stated, because this Parliament has not kept its promises to the people. So whether it's the 9th or the 12th, I'm not especially bothered. All I would say is that if we're worried about voters being confused about an election or being unable to vote, then I think changing the day of the election is one of those ways in which people could potentially be confused, because we've always voted, I don't know for how long, but certainly in my short number of years on this planet, on a Thursday, that is when we normally vote. So a change of the date, I think, could be confusing. If we have to vote on the 9th, so be it. But the 12th should be the day on which we vote, because that is the day we normally vote. And I just want to... No, I'm not going to give any more. I just want to say one final thing. I just want to say one final point in terms of the tone of this forthcoming election as well, because that is going to be important. And we've heard a lot of attacks on the Prime Minister in the last few days in this chamber, and there was an analysis out today saying the person who's been on the receiving end of the largest amount of bile and personal attacks has in fact been the Prime Minister. And we will see more of that in this election campaign. The 2017 election campaign was the worst election I have ever been involved in when it comes to behaviour, and I fought 8 election campaigns in my short life, and the 2017 election was the very worst. And as the Leader of the Opposition is here, I hope that he will reflect on the words he uses in this election, because what happened at the last election was, in his name, my staff was spat at. In his name, I was attacked in the street by people chanting his name at me on his behalf because of the divisive language he has consistently used before that election in the run-up to it. So I will take him at his word. I take him at his word this election, that he will encourage his supporters and party members to engage in better behaviour, because the 2017 election was an appalling campaign for many of us to go through, and the abuse and threats and damage to property, damage to constituents' property, perpetrated in some cases by people in the name of the Leader of the Opposition. So I hope the campaign next time in December is a more civil campaign on all sides, because this is not a matter that one side owns particularly. So I hope that we will all conduct ourselves somewhat better in the forthcoming election. And on that Madam Deputy Speaker, you have morphed into a different chair now. But I will conclude, other than to say that I will oppose the amendment for the 9th. If we end up with the 9th, so be it. But it is so much better if we stick to the tradition of always voting on a Thursday, which is something constituents very clearly understand.
Michael Tomlinson.
Very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, for calling me to speak. I'm going to make a change in tack from the previous 3 speakers and actually speak to some of the amendments that have been put down. But I do want to pick up a point from my honourable friend, the member from Briggood, who actually makes a really important point at the end of his speech. We all heard, Madam Deputy Speaker, about a kinder, gentler politics. And I want to pick up what my honourable friend said and say that I entirely agree with him. And I look forward, like